Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining HR Executive, Pilot, and Beamery today for the webinar. Organizations overlook up to 50% of HiPo talent. What can you do to cultivate development for hidden high potential employees? We're so excited to talk to Ben Brooks, founder and CEO of Pilot, and Nick Ionita, head of product strategy and GM of Beamery Grow. Let's get to know each other and get to know them a little bit better. First, please meet Ben Brooks, one of HR Tech's top 100 influencers and the Coach's Corner author of HR Executive. Ben, I founded Pilot out of a desire to democratize employee development for everyone. He has run a private CEO of executive coach practice for over 10 years, co-founded the LGBT Employee Resource Group at his management consulting firm, and was on the board of directors that helped repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Ben believes so strongly in the mission of Pilot that he uses his entire life savings to launch the company and strives daily to help everyone feel powerful at work. Welcome, Ben. Can you tell us a little bit about why uncovering and developing high potential talent is so important to you?
That Nick and I both share that's near and dear to my heart around, helping great people further their careers. I've been a HiPo at times in my career. I've been a low performer at other times too. I've been across the whole bell curve, but knowing that opportunities, the life-changing opportunities that high potential development programs and opportunities and feedback and assignments can create has been life-changing for me, and I want to help get that to more people.
Thank you, Ben. I appreciate that. Next, I want to introduce you all to Nick Ionita, the head of product strategy and GM of Beamery Grow. Formerly, Nick served as the chief executive officer and co-founder of Flux, an internal mobility platform that aligned employees looking to grow their careers inside their companies. After its recent acquisition, Flux is now offered as Beamery Grow, and Nick is bringing his expertise and passion for building products and teams to Beamery. Nick has spent the last 15 plus years using technology to change how people interact with media, advertising, commerce, and work. Nick, so glad to have you here today. I'd love to hear your perspective on why it's so important to uncover and develop high potential employees.
Thanks, Leighton. Yeah, it's great to be here. For me, I've been really focused on making internal mobility, which I think is a big part of this, a reality for organizations for the last 5 years, but it's been very personal thing to me. I think like Ben, I've benefited a lot from being in places that help foster development and opportunity. And I've done the startup thing several times where when you're small, everybody knows each other and the opportunity is easy to find, but you enter larger environments, it's much harder to see those people because sometimes they're not out there and easy to see, particularly these days with hybrid. And just had a lot of success with people who have come from groups like customer success, weren't even in technology backgrounds, and have become some of the best product managers I've ever hired, strictly by kind of knowing they're there, letting them try things. And a big part of starting Flux was really helping companies systematize that and giving employees the tools to find those opportunities and really reach their potential.
Thanks, Nick. We're just about to dive into the good stuff, and I'd like to take a moment to know all of you too. A poll with 2 questions will pop up on your screen. Please take a second to respond to each. Once the responses are in, we'll share the final tally with you all.
All right, vote early, vote often. We got, we'll tabulate the results. And you'll see the question, how would you describe your current employee development programs and what's the biggest challenge you face? Those are the 2 questions. In about 30 seconds, we'll get everybody's answers as well. Okay. Be some good data we'll gather at the beginning here. Deborah already dropped something in the chat too about finding the time. Global alignment from Mary. Ooh, ownership.
All right, so the results are in. It looks like the highest percentage here for the first question was 40%, slowly developing, slow to move. The second question here, 24, it's hard to plan.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like we can leverage some of this data today in our conversation to inform, what we'll talk about. And one thing that we like to do on webinars is we use a +1. If you hear something that Nick says that's super on the nose and you're just all about it, and it's an amen, it's your put your hands up, you do a +1. So let's everyone just drop a +1 in the chat and make sure our keyboards are working. We got the everyone drop down in there. We'll just blow it up with +1s, right? It's just a nice virtual back and forth. And I want you to put a +11 if you think Nick is a total beast because he took a red eye last night from San Francisco to London. And the show must go on. This guy last night spent the night on a 777, okay? Or a 787. Which plane? You know what you flew, Nick? What kind of plane you were on?
I think it was a 777. Yeah.
Okay. Lucky guess, right? So he's on a triple. So you got a lot of. So this is how committed Nick is to employee development that he gets off a red eye and and just double cappuccinoed, ready to go. So great example. Well, Nick, it's awesome to be with you today. I'm here in New York City. You're in London. We got people all over the country and the world joining us today. Let's dive right into this kind of open question we have, which is why are most talent and performance management processes overlooking about half of the true high potentials? Nick, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. So I'll start, Ben, by kind of saying, first of all, I think when HiPo programs are in place, a lot of the goal is, retaining that talent, continuing to apply them to critical things, the business needs done, but are also really great growth experiences for them. Sadly, I don't think that's the outcome of most performance management programs, which in my experience are usually done in hindsight, right? It's measuring people against a current role or prescribed ladder of progression. So by their nature, it's about performance and it's not actually about potential. So I think, a big part of this is really, in understanding potential isn't just about someone having the skills to do their current job or the next job really well. That's important. But it's about understanding that someone, how someone could be applied to a lot of different things and picking the paths that they're most interested in and letting that motivation kind of surface the potential. And we can't just rely on managers to identify these things, right? So a lot of this, again, we see so much stuff now across our client base between how this gets harder, particularly as people are in hybrid environments and places where they're not seen, right? And it's very different. So performance to me isn't kind of the place to start. It's really finding ways for people to really use development coming out of those things to reach their potential and kind of see what's new versus just kind of looking backwards.
Yeah, I'd be curious, everyone, as we're talking here, if you've got, performance management process, maybe even the chat type performance, if you've got type talent, if you've got both, because I think what Nick is bringing up is a really important distinction I've seen as well, is that, we talk about performance management of measuring people against standards for a role, right? Did they perform? You're backward looking, what happened last year, last quarter, and we sort of tie that then also to compensation and ratings, and maybe some goal setting, but then it can often, we try to pack in development about the future and how they could grow and their potential. It just ends up being, I call it too much, if you've ever packed a box with too much stuff and you carry it and the box blows out the bottom, I feel like that's your average performance management process, which is sort of anxiety, lack of communication, misalignment, money, ratings, feedback, goals, future career, and let's all do that in 45 minutes off of a 3-page Word document.
Once a year.
Yeah, once a year, exactly. So it looks like there's a bunch of folks that are saying that they've got both. Some have performance. Some of it sounds like it's informal. And by the way, people are dropping their LinkedIn profiles, and that's another great way to network. Everyone here clearly cares about high potentials and high potential development programs. We're going to have an opportunity later for you all to share your ideas. This isn't just the Nick and Ben show. So we're going to want you to submit what works for you, resources you've used, frameworks, authors, podcasts, etc., and to network with each other as well. And I'll tell you, your point, Nick, around managers assessing, that's a big failure mode, right? That the manager only has one perspective. You're the manager of customer success. You know customer success. You may not know product, and you may not see that Jillian actually has really good analytical skills that would be great to identify unmet customer needs from a feature manager or product manager perspective, right? And so often managers only know what they know, and there's often incentives, and I don't know if anyone's seen this, if you want to drop it in the chat, where people will hoard talent, because if a manager has someone go from customer success to product, they now have an open head count, which they could lose if there's a budget freeze or cut in a recession, let's say, if those things ever happen, and they have to go hire someone, train them, develop them, onboard them, which is just more work. So isn't it better for the manager in the short term to just kind of keep Jillian in customer success, but in the long term, Jillian will go work in product just at another company rather than yours? I mean, is that kind of what you've seen hoarding, Nick, in your experience as well?
Yeah, a lot. I mean, look, when we talk to people about internal mobility and successful career development programs tied to these things, it's usually one of the number one objections or at least questions. And I think my cheeky answer to it is, as a shareholder, you definitely want them working at your company, not a competitor. But I think the balance here is, you said this, I think, well, Ben. We're also training a lot of people how to be managers, and they're career coaches, and this is hard for HR, and we've got to get to a place where there's a balance in some freedom to explore, and those managers enabling some of that exploration, understanding that it's much easier to plan when someone's going to transition than them giving you 2 weeks, and making sure the same tools we use to have those people explore where they can take their potential, someone else is using the same thing to come into that team, and it works like a system rather than one team losing a bunch of people, which I think is most people's fears.
Yeah, manager capability, as long as I was a management consultant, I've been in HR, well, everybody has complained about managers and frontline managers for as long as I've known about business and organizations, for as long as I've been a professional. Maybe drop a 0 in the chat if you've got trouble with your managers. There's trouble with various capabilities. You need to train more of them. You promote the star programmer into a manager, star saleswoman into a manager. Is that happening? We got some zeros coming in. I've never done zeros before. I'm improvising, Nick. This is the first time. I do +1s. We're mixing it up with zeros. Yeah, I feel like we're back. We're programming old school, like zeros and ones. So. And I think that's right, because managers are often, we talk about this with Pilot a lot, they're focused on supervision. Am I giving the direction, the work assignments, the schedule? Am I inspecting the work? And you think of maybe someone who's a general manager at a restaurant that has a shift, and they've got a bunch of reservations coming in, and they've got to-go orders, and they've got to get through that afternoon and that evening. And that is success, is sort of surviving the performance of that evening, which is supervision, which is super important. I think we sort of underweight. Someone's like, oh, man, managers have to be coaches, and yes, but if they're not have the basics of supervision, the coaching is sort of built on a foundation of sand, I always say. That you got to have the supervision part right, but then you have to shift, and we talk about this with pilot managers a lot, to development, because generally supervision wears out managers, and then employees feel micromanaged or not trusted or things. But development often takes some extra thought and work, but then it requires less supervision. And that the more you supervise, the more you have to supervise. The more you develop, the less you have to supervise. Nick, what have you seen between supervision and development in your?
Yeah. Look, I think that's absolutely right, and I think you have to have both. But I think the key I've found, and having managed many large teams myself before, a big part of development isn't also just the gap closing. How do we deal with deficiencies or something somebody needs to improve? I think as you get better, and as you build that competency yourself as a manager, a big part of it is figuring out how do we apply people to things that they're good at and that they want to do. And that's actually where I found in my career where people shines comes out, because that's not the skill checkbox. It's the intangible things that actually make these people high performers. And when you're able to actually do that as a manager, you're also then able to identify when you're hiring, which is key, right? Because a lot of this is knowing what that good looks like and then being able to kind of match that pattern. It's definitely both, but you're right. The development piece, to me, unlocks a lot more, and then the supervision is quite different, right? It's more directing people to things than making sure someone did something, which are very different tasks.
Well, and I noticed also that on the Harvard Business Review stat we have on the slide that about, less than 10% of time of, from talent programs is on the development. About 90% ends up being in the assessment. When I was in the corporate world, we'd have these annual talent reviews, these really advanced systems and key experiences matrix and leadership competencies and functional skills, all these things and multi-rater feedback. And you would think that we were evaluating a vaccine for efficacy, and it was just Bob and finance, and that we spent so much precision and time. It was great, but we would sort of exhaust ourselves. By the time we got through a 2-day talent review with 2 months of prep and all that, then we would have a list, and Bob was on that list of HiPo people and talent because he was in the controller's office. But we just were like, okay, Bob's a HiPo. And then the next year we'd come and sort of do the same dance again, create a list again. And it was a bit of Groundhog Day. It looks like, Jennifer, that resonates with you. Is anyone else had that where you just do these reviews or these talent calibrations or assessments, and you have a list of sort of maybe your special stars or your HiPos or your future leaders? The question I think for me is always, well, what do you do with that list? Because yes, about half the HiPos may be unknown, but even for the ones that are known, are you developing them? Do they even know they're on maybe such a list, or that you see that kind of a potential? And what are your perspectives, Nick? Should people know that they're a HiPo, or should you have a conversation saying, we see a bigger future for you at this organization? What's the communication to some of these employees?
Yeah. Well, I mean, honestly, I would hope that anyone going to an organization feels that, right? Because this is about reaching potential versus us, I believe deeply, like identifying the top 5%. So I think with a lot of this is like, look, like a lot of it's how you have that development conversation and understanding that, you particularly as a manager are there to help someone unlock that potential. Let's figure out the best way. And we think that, look, for some people, there's no ceiling. I think the challenge is actually with what you've laid out is, we work with a lot of customers from, scale ups to Fortune 500s that spend so much time on the documentation and the structure you're describing. And it reminds me of documentation a lot in software, where it's expensive to make, it's hard to stand up, and then it's even harder to maintain. And then what we've done is we've created these rigid structures that are valuable in some respects. But to the HiPo list, it's like, well, maybe their path is somewhere else. They've kind of maxed out in this team, but we've created these ladders when we need them to be a jungle gym. And we can't even move people and understand how to transfer them between them. So some of that almost needs to be loosened up a bit, I think, in a way where, people can use those structures to actually traverse the organization.
Yeah, I think I like that jungle gym versus a ladder analogy, because, we'll often think, and I think it's a challenge, especially with flatter organizations. A lot of organizations are trying to have fewer levels between the CEO and the lowest level person. We worked with Thomson Reuters as one of our customers, and they got it down to 6 levels. And we work with organizations that have 20 plus. And so when you have 6 levels, if you come in at the ground level, there's only so many vertical ladder rungs to climb. In fact, there are just 5 more. So I think that reframing, that Deloitte called it, I think about a decade ago, a lattice, a career lattice rather than a ladder. And to think differently, that it may not be always a vertical thing where I think we collapse growth with achievement, of something, and a title, a promotion, more compensation, which is all fine. But the growth part of it doesn't necessarily mean it's vertical. And many people, we found one of our customers, MetLife, we found a lot of folks that were in their sales organization didn't want to go to the next level in sales and vertical ascension. They wanted to service a different market segment, a different client size, a different capability they didn't know how to sell, maybe to move to a different geography. That for them was keeping their career fresh and alive, not becoming a regional director, as an example.
Yeah. And I mean, you see that in engineering, right? I mean, a lot of people don't want to become managers. They just want to work on a new problem. And, that turning them into a manager actually has them heading out the door if that's not where they get satisfaction. I think, Ben, on your point, this is where I for me personally, I've loved the customer success to product manager or operations kind of moves we see all the time where, customer success and support, these organizations just by function that usually don't have a lot of ladders. And so the HiPos in those groups, if they don't become the managers, end up churning out. When the reality is you've got this pool of people, you had mentioned this in the comments, that have such a special empathy and view of a product and service that the rest of the company doesn't have. That's what you need to be tapping into everywhere else, but those people don't know how to get there.
Totally, and it sounds like the is resonating with Janice and a few other folks in the comments. David Adams said, talent review rarely moves beyond talent identification. Our leaders don't know how or don't have the resources to develop employees. So David, you're my plant. Thank you for the transition to the next question and the next slide. That is absolutely perfect. Let's keep the chats and the comments going. We've got some stats we'll talk about. Our next, discussion prompt here is, how can organizations learn to focus on developing their possible superstars instead of exhausting resources on assessing? So we talked about the perils of assessing, too precise, too much about the ladder, too rigid, loosening that up. But let's say, Nick, we've got folks, they're known people or people get nominated. We have a whole list of folks. What do we do and say, hey, how do we develop these folks? Because they're feeling maybe in an engagement survey or an exit interview, turnover data, I don't have good career prospects here. I don't feel like I can grow. I don't think I have a future here. What do we do about that?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, for me, and again, this is my opinion, but I'm seeing it, I think, more increasingly. We have a lot of these programs around, high performers, or even like stuff like mentorship too, which sometimes is associated with that. And there are great outcomes for the people who go through those programs, but by function, they're hard to administer and expensive, and thus not available to that many people. So I think a lot of this is getting to a balance where there are these white glove aspects of these things that are important, but a lot of this is just, how do we give employees the tools to be more self-directed and to be found and to create those cultures to allow that development, right? This is getting away from needing to prescribe everything, right? I think we've got some of those prescriptions down in the ladders and the job lanes. What we've got to do is, back to like the jungle gym analogy, I think a lot of Fortune 500s have actually understood this for a long time, right? But at leadership levels, this is why GM had rotations, or management consultancies have these rotations, because if you're going to be a GM of a business unit, you should probably understand how sales works, even if you're not going to do it. And I think when we talk about HiPos, whether they've been identified or they're there, back to the 50% point, I think that anyone who's high performing is driven by advancement, getting to work on new things. So this is really about just surfacing those opportunities and creating cultures that makes it safe to try and low risk, so those people can be found and take those actions. And we see this a ton in how we survey within our product Grow, where just employees believing that they have career visibility and confidence in navigation. I believe I can not just see it, but I can take action. Those people stay, and some of our customers, up to 2.5 times longer than employees who don't believe that exists, just out of function of knowing it's there and owning it.
Yeah, and I think people are different life cycles in their lives. Someone just had a kid, they may not be up for a stretch assignment at work, but they might be after 6 months. They might be, so there's an SO. I think the option value of knowing it's there makes a lot of sense. And I think part of the quote, the coaching quote I would say is, secret of getting ahead is getting started. That so often talent, learning, HR folks try to design a Taj Mahal for development, rather than just putting out the Fisher-Price play set, the jungle gym, to say, let's go try some things. So, if your development, programs are taking years to design, you got to cut the unit of measure down to months or weeks. Mm-hmm. I think leveraging, Beamery Grow, leveraging Pilot, something else like that, hard to scale is one of the top pain points that you all are facing in the poll. And part of hard to scale of what we often see is it's something you make everybody fly into headquarters. They have to be out of their role for 2 weeks, or they work on a challenge project. These are fine, but how do you, Josh Bersin talks a lot about learning in the flow of work. And so how do you have this be something that a busy high performer, someone with a really active life outside of work, can still develop and grow? And I think part of it, what I call, is making learning and development more snackable. That we often, I think, typically in my career early on, if you're going to do some learning event or development event, it was in a Sheraton ballroom or at the headquarters office, and it was 2, 3, 4, 5 days, which meant, there had to be coverage. I had to plan ahead. I had to travel. If I was busy, we have a big RFP due. Okay, I can't go to that training thing. Oh, that's not till next year. I push out my development. Very clunky method. especially compared to what, millennials and Gen Z are used to in terms of much more flexible, agility, virtual. So I think part of developing people is also changing. The development isn't going to graduate school. They could be, nothing wrong with graduate school, but for the majority of your employees, that's not going to fit into their life and maybe not be the right skills on that. I don't know if you're going to get a degree in self-direction in graduate school, but yet a massively important competency to be entrepreneurial inside of a company. I mean, how do you think about, incrementalizing and putting in the flow of work, making it sort of doable to develop and grow?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question because I think this is another one of these things. Even in more fluid environments, it can be really hard to pick a starting point and a scope that makes sense. I think what we find is, the beauty of I think what a lot of talent marketplaces and things like Grow have surfaced is there's a lot of opportunity to develop that just work that has to happen in other parts of the organization. And so, I think, again, my background's in product. I think about all the times that we've had something we've needed to take to market and all the effort that goes into that beyond building it, and where we've just needed 5 hours of time from somebody. And all of a sudden that person's getting a completely new experience, that they weren't aware of. I'm tapping into people I didn't know existed in the organization, or getting new respect for functions that I didn't totally understand. And I think a lot of this is if you can tap into that in places, because I think at this point, every company needs more help on things. I don't think anybody's like, yeah, we're good. Got everybody we need. We're getting all the work done that needs to be done. It's more organic and it may feel chaotic, but at the same time, it's igniting that culture. It's giving people, I mean, the point you made, Ben, about just where you are in life and what's available, like it's trying to make sure people don't have dead ends. And we know this, that people learn different ways. And I think giving people bite-sized things that aren't hard to plan and aren't overwhelming to do is key in having those experiences, then choosing what you want to go deep on, right, and spending more time with.
I love the go where you need help in an org. I put it in the chat. Super pro tip, everyone. Write that Nick's pro tip down there, because it is so key that a development is, I think we often think, again, a degree, a new job or role, but oftentimes growth happens from working on something for an hour or a half a day or a week or a special project. And so I've seen, people that will never go to trade shows, right? But we need to fill the booth at a trade show, or to do a customer install, or to help with a service thing. I had a friend who was at Lululemon, and they had, I think what do they call it? Shearmageddon, when the fabric was too thin, and he got deployed to help solve that problem. And it was one of the most massive, it actually shifted the course of his career, because he started to realize what he liked to work on, which was more operations than the job that he had otherwise. So I think that's where you don't have to necessarily, don't limit your development opportunities to what HR can cook up.
Yeah.
Look into, listen at, the cross-departmental meeting. Oh, we're about to implement Workday. We need people to help be change agents. Oh, we're going to do this thing for the holidays, this community thing. Oh, we're trying to do this summer intern program that's virtual. We need people to help. Listen for those opportunities, and that's where HR can be a great switchboard. Think of connecting, right, the demand of the work or the need with the supply of the talent, a very strategic role where HR has the best data and the best relationships, and can, move much faster than kind of maybe clunky HR systems could, just with that sort of tribal knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, look, I love that. And I think, this to me is also the evolved role of HR now, right? This isn't, it's really understanding, I think about the role of an HR business partner, where, you're really understanding what the business or that team or that organization needs. And this isn't just about hiring new heads all the time, right? It's understanding how to apply people, how to get things done, which again, isn't always kind of a new hire. And I think about my career, I was very lucky to fall into product. I loved engineering as a hobby, wasn't good at it, kind of on a 50-hour-a-week kind of job. But my career early on was a process of figuring out what I didn't want to do. And I think that is for a lot of people. And if we can de-risk that, trying more things, we're going to get people who, a big part of that potential is motivation and enjoying what you're doing, not just skill set. And I think just making that bar lower and lower, the minimum viable product comment Janice made is great. That's the key to unlocking this on both sides, because it is a, supply-demand connection we're creating. You're absolutely right.
Has anyone read the book? Put a +1 in the chat if you read the book Range. The subtitle is Why Generalists Will Rule the Future. It was the best-selling business book, I think, of 2019 or 2020, but called Range, if you've read it. If not, a great one, and what Nick's talking about, the author calls sampling. A bit like going to a buffet. You try out different things to learn what you don't like is an important thing. I thought I wanted to do supply chain earlier in my career, and I was okay at it, but I didn't get a ton of fulfillment. I would have never guessed I would have gotten into HR, but I got into HR because we needed help around diversity work. So I ended up having sort of my day job and my gay job, we called it. And so I helped, with the LGBT work on that. That got me a sampling of HR that I would have never done from a jobs ladder board thing. But that was my jungle gym moment of a different thing on the playground. And I thought, wow. And I wound up there, and it was a very sort of transformative experience. So I think part of it, a lot of this resonating in the chat with you all, it sounds like, is specifically this idea of not needing to pull people from their roles, because then you have another recruiting backfill issue. You solve one problem by creating another one, but stretch assignments, special projects, and as Nick said, in hybrid and remote, you have to give employees visibility. Part of the sleeper HiPo problem, one of our customers, Nestle, talks about HiPos on the bubble or sleeper HiPos, is people just don't know because they work at some office that was part of an acquisition that nobody ever thinks of, or they're in a non-revenue generating function, or they're under a manager who's not that great. And so part of it, and if you work from home or you're remote, it's out of sight, out of mind. Passive FaceTime bias, MIT has studied, and we often say at Pilot, it's not who you know, but who knows you and who brings up your name when opportunities are spoken about. So part of what we have to have employees do, that's part of being on camera when you're virtual or remote, engaging in Teams or Slack, sharing your aspirations, super, super, super important things.
Yep.
All right, let's go to the next slide with some great questions. And it looks like some people are dropping in the books. Liz has a Harvard Business Review article in there, some other great career stories as well. The next prompt we have for us, Nick, is for organizations that do invest in development, right? They get it, they're all about it. What are some challenges they face that reduce the chance of reaching all the sleeper HiPos? What gets in the way?
Yeah, I think this got mentioned earlier. The biggest thing we see across, prospects and existing customers is this protectionist culture, right? Where we get HiPos who are trapped with managers who won't let them continue on somewhere else in the organization. And they ultimately leave because they can't progress to a direction that they're excited about. And then this is the thing that kills me in general, right? Like our generation is not like our parents where you stayed and built a career somewhere. It's just easier to leave and go somewhere else, and it shouldn't be that way. So I think a lot of what I talk about to people is I've been so focused on the mobility and growing people internally, but I think there's this huge knock-on benefit of retention and doing this growth piece for everyone very well that impacts recruitment. So I think about organizations like trees, and what we want to do is we want to grow people up in, just one more analogy for everybody, we want to grow people up into the branches and the leaves as best we can and bring new people in through the roots. And what that ends up meaning is there's always going to be somebody we needed yesterday that has some domain expertise. We got to graft on a branch. But healthy organizations aren't grafting all the branches on, right? They're doing a little bit of grafting and trim, but we're bringing a lot of people in. And what that means is we're getting better about the high volume, lower roles we can bring people in. We're finding the new HiPos. And the people that are HiPos there, we're growing them into the stuff that's hard to get. And we're building, our ability to build inside an organization. So it was a little more long-winded, but I think this is really what you're trying to unlock. And then it changes your whole strategy for how recruitment and everything else works if you can grow and retain those people.
Yeah, no, so much the pain points around recruitment, the root cause is lack of talent management and lack of learning and development. And so symptomatically you solve, we just need more of this, we need more of that, rather than working with what we have when people know the culture, the people, the processes, when they're much more likely to succeed. You bring in someone from the outside, it's a lot higher risk, a lot could go wrong. When someone's already proven inside, that's a different thing. And I think, one of the things a couple of you put in chat is around money. And, hard to scale and finances come up a lot. one of the things I always ask folks, and they typically don't have the answer to this, which is how much do you spend per capita or per employee for a development program? And they'll say, oh, I don't know, or da da da, or it costs this much all in, or I got vendor costs and stuff. It's worth doing the math, right? And looking at, designing a program that costs less money per employee. So if you have to fly people, like Nick did last night, around the world to develop, it's not going to be very scalable, and you're not going to reach a lot of people, and you're going to exclude a lot of working parents who maybe can't do that, and other things like that, that you probably have a commitment to inclusion, so you need to think about that, physical abilities, et cetera. And if you can reduce the cost, and I don't mean reduce the quality, but reduce the cost per employee, the same budget that you have, you don't need to get more budget, your budget stretches further to reach more people. And when you do that and you get the data, that's a big part of it. The other thing we see with a lot of our customers, hard to get business executives focused on talent and development, easy to get business executives focused on numbers. So if you start with data, it engages them around the investment. Hey, here's what the research says. Here's the McKinsey stat about, outperforming competition, third-party stats, but also looking internally. Hey, people that went through some of our other programs in the past were more likely to be retained, were more productive, got promoted faster, increased their sales quota, had fewer errors per line of code, whatever they're was more likely to refer a customer or an employee. So part of making the case for an investment, right, is do you use what you've got now well? If you're paying for a bunch of content in a learning management system that 1% of your employees look at, and your goal is to grow it to 2%, maybe you don't pay for that anymore, because if you calculate the cost per usage and it ends up being hundreds of dollars for someone to do a single e-learning course that they could find on YouTube for free, perhaps it's better to reallocate that money, right? Additional money is like additional headcount. There's a hell of a lot of scrutiny. Existing money is like an existing headcount. Nobody generally questions it unless you're restructuring. So using what you have differently and redesigning it differently can make what I found to be a huge impact. Nick, what have you seen?
Yeah, no, totally. And I mean, look, that's directly linked to people staying and generating more benefit within the organization. So, at the end of the day, that is developing a good program like that and delivering it is probably cheaper than the agency cost of replacing somebody when they leave, right? So these things are very easy to tie together. And I think Beverly made a comment in the chat. I love here on managers need to have an expectation to develop and hire talent and reward them for this. Absolutely. We have one customer who, back to the customer support point, on the surface, they looked at a bunch of data. They saw people leaving a team. And the reality was, the reaction is, oh, they're bad managers. Everybody's churning out. What was actually happening was they were going to other parts of the business that were new business. And, the benefit of getting people who knew the domain, who were there, understand the culture, that you've hired them, is hugely valuable. That's a competitive advantage. And what they ended up realizing after we kind of went through that was, no, this one team's a huge talent exporter, and you've got these talent importers right now, customers of that team. You created a farm system. So those managers who are basically the farm team need to be rewarded. They need to be rewarded with bonuses because they're creating people who are going on and doing more in the company, and they need to be rewarded with more recruiting support because now you've created this system. And everything just kind of blossomed from there as soon as that mentality shift to how do we enable more of that? So Beverly's comments spot on.
I love the farm team. We got trees, a jungle gym, a farm. We got lattices. We got a lot going on here today at this webinar. And Janice makes a great point about also figuring out how to do it in the workday. Oftentimes they have these things you have to do at off hours or evenings. And so you typically often have an inverted relationship between a high performer and the amount of learning and development they consume, because your best people are busy delivering, and often you're giving the most development to your worst employees. And so you have to figure out, right, how to invest in those busy people, which is back to kind of right-sizing those things. And then ultimately, one of the things we talk about at Pilot a lot is advocating for yourself. HR in general is not great at this in my experience. I write about this in my columns a lot. Defending budgets, asking for things. HR will get its budget cut in half and then be expected to do twice as much. If sales got its budget cut in half, they would say, well, you better expect less sales. There's just trade-off. right? That if you're going to have half the sales force, don't expect more sales, expect less. So part of this is, kind of having heart and backbone as we deal with our organizations. And on the investment side, hey, Mrs. CEO or Mr. CEO, you made a big commitment to DEI. I want to help deliver on that commitment. Or you made a commitment to be a best place to work. You made a commitment for people to not feel like they have the dead ends that Nick talked about. Talk about a horrible feeling, working a dead end, feeling stuck or in a rut. I'd like to help you deliver on that. I need resources to do that. If I don't get those resources, we're not going to deliver on the commitment. And it's a real sort of, no joke kind of conversation where you just are talking about trade-offs, because ultimately budgets are a reflection of values. Mm-hmm. If an organization says they care about something, then they allocate resources, capacity, dollars, staff, facilities, etc. So you want to use and challenge and to say, is this a thing? And it may be part of, investing in development means you need to, lower investment in other things. What is the priority? Because we often see a little bit of this, or we do a little of this, and we kind of, we peanut butter the thing, and we spread a little bit here and here and here. But if you've got 25% attrition in a professional services organization this year, and you're spending $1 gazillion on recruit, you probably want to go all in on retention. And you probably want to, worry less about a few other different things that were out there, or maybe you over-perked people or over-benefited them, because it's hard to buy off, just like if you ever raise kids, hard to buy off a kid for long, right? The snack doesn't last very long, Yep. And the perk, the stipend, the extra, day off, et cetera, versus them feeling like they have those opportunities. Let me go to our next slide. How can you uncover the HiPos and what can you do to better develop them? We talked in particular about this point of the sleeper HiPos. There's the ones that are in the review, like Bob in finance, and he's on the list. And we know Bob, and Bob works at headquarters, and Bob's boss is part of the executive team, and Bob presents a lot, and he's sort of this known person. But how do we uncover, Nick, the ones that we don't know about?
Yeah, I mean, hybrids just made this more complicated, right? I think the double-edged sword with all of this flexibility we all now have from this crazy shared experience of the last couple of years is, people are harder to see. And that's a big part of it. Because again, I just don't think we can rely on managers to just know and surface people. And even if that intention is good, they may not know how to or know where those people are. So I just continue to go back to, we've got to create the tools and the environments for those people to surface, right? Like it's a two-way thing. We need to have the tools and I think the safety nets for managers to surface those people and help propel and enable them, even if that means they leave their team, but also allowing those people the tools to raise their hands and be found for things. And then I think, the benefit of all this data and everything now, back to like the last point is, I think a big part of this for HR teams and for management is getting ourselves out of the administration of all of this and being able to actually look at the signals and enable these points, these people when they surface. So again, to me, this is about visibility, findability, and then, encouraging the hand raising and then figuring out, we've got these people in these other groups and we've just not focused attention there. It's not been a priority. We haven't listened to managers, and now we need to kind of unlock this.
Yeah, I love the be found. To be found. I think that so often we want to be found by others, but raising one's hand, and that there are big DEI implications around the point that Nick just made, because depending on the culture you grew up in, maybe the country you grew up in, the type of family, you may have never been taught to do that. In certain parts of the world, they call it tallest poppy. Tallest poppy gets cut off. And, I talked to a friend this weekend here in New York City, and he was saying about his career, and I was raised in a way you just do good hard work and you put your head down, you don't say anything, and eventually opportunities open up. And I said, are you open to another point of view? I said, you should do hard work, but you shouldn't put your head down. You should talk about what you want, what you're interested in. And it's not a demand, and it's not a threat, but then people know. And the story I'll share is one of our pilot customers early on, Cadillac. We had, an amazing sponsor and manager there in the marketing org, and one of her employees, female as well, the manager thought the employee wanted to have to start a family. So she never really thought of her for relocation because she knew her family was all in the New York metro area. The employee really wanted an international assignment. They really wanted to work abroad. And it was one of those things, back to where do you need help? Cadillac could not fill the international assignments for whatever reason. And the manager was blocking this employee from what they wanted because the manager had no frickin' idea that the employee wanted to work abroad. And in the pilot program, she raised her hand and articulated what she wanted. And I kid you not, she was living in Zurich, Switzerland within 30 days by simply saying what she wanted. And she had 3 months of the best summer of her life in Zurich, working there. She's now a mom to Nolan, a 3-year-old kid. She got everything she wanted, just not all at once. She had a sequence in her mind that was a secret to her manager. And so some of this is as simple as conversation that you found is expressing your desires. If you're in customer success, many people have no idea that you ever want to do anything besides customer success, or that you're feeling bored here, or that you don't have enough challenge. And I think giving employees the permission, especially if they don't come from the families or the cultures where they're used to that, to speak up and to advocate for themselves, to raise their hands, to initiate, to offer, to join, that's ultimately where careers absolutely accelerate. It isn't about necessarily an HR system or a technology. That's a cultural, relational, conversational thing. I mean, Nick, do you vibe with that, or do you see it differently?
Absolutely. I love that. I mean, look, there's, I'm kind of ballparking stats here, but I mean, Deloitte did a study, I think over like 10 or 15 years of data that, back to the DEI point and hand raising, that showed if we just looked at qualifications for something, right, not potential. So the skills checklist that a recruiter would go through, it takes women being about 95% qualified to be willing to raise their hand on average, and men about 60%, right? So if that's literally all we're going by, and the only way we're allowing people to be found, by that function, just look at what you're missing out on. And I think what we found that's been huge, like we've got a number of customers of ours, again, that have focused on how do we create successful paths for people out of groups like customer success into corporate, where in some of these organizations, like that is moving from hourly to salary. That is a life change. It's guaranteed hours. It's an incredible brand story for the company as well. And, what we've been finding is a big part of that is the safe space, flagging interests, motivation, not just looking at skills, but then it's also been connecting people to others who have made the moves as well, and surfacing that and celebrating it, right? And again, going back to my background in product, talking to somebody, career advice from somebody who was in finance, who went to business school and landed in product is going to be very different than the person who went from customer success into product. And so and again, that's not mentorship, but that is surfacing connection. And again, this is allowing employees to connect and self-organize and find these things out. And you as the HR team or management is just facilitating that and encouraging it, which I think is, again, another way to drive that, I think, just willingness to raise your hand, right? They've got to start there.
And some of the best, breakthrough development opportunities are not necessarily HR designed. They are HR supported, but it's people at International Women's Day celebration, having a cup of coffee and a donut, talking about what's going on, and someone talks about a new project. So I'd love to help with that, and boom, it happens. So I think that's also just fostering the conversation, using your intranet, using your newsletter, using Slack and Teams to highlight people that do this, because a lot of employees say, I didn't even know you could do this. And I'll say, in City or a national education nonprofit that we work with, we had a member of Pilot who's in our employee development program, getting empowered, learning to be a hand raiser, learning to be found, learning to advocate for herself. And she ran into a fellow colleague who'd been at the organization for a decade, a director, 90 people work for her. And she said, how's it going? She said, I think I'm out of here. She said, oh, really? Why? And she says, well, we reorged and I got this new job and I don't like it. It's not really the design that I want. It's not where I'm going to take my career. And she said, oh, well, did you counter? And the woman says, counter? What do you mean counter? He said, well, did you tell them what you'd want to do instead? And the woman says, you can do that? And it was a little like this secret menu of things you can do or not do. And this person's demographics affected their sort of worldview around this. And she did counter. She's still there. They accepted her counter, and that's 4 years ago, right? But it's just a matter of, you're not stuck. Like, Organizations don't want to lose you. So realize work is a lot more fluid than our HR systems and processes would have people realize, and we need employees to understand that.
Yeah, you don't get what you don't ask for.
100%. Well, we're gonna ask you all for something. The next point, your thoughts. We already got a bunch of them in here, but what we're gonna do is we're gonna ask everyone in the next 2 or 3 minutes, what's working with your development programs? What are you seeing resonates? Is there a product or service you like, a framework you use, a podcast you listen to, something you've done in a nimble way with limited resources? Just drop those in the chat. We're going to consolidate them all up and email them out to everybody that attended today. So this is going to be not just Nick and Ben's ideas, but everybody's. And like, Janice has something in here as an example. Career planning conversations that are separate than performance and not policed by HR, right? Beverly has, simple mentoring conversations over coffee, not a 3-hour soul-searching steak dinner in Midtown, but just a cup of coffee or a little stroll. So, listening to the Work Life podcast by Adam Grant, from Wharton, he's got a bunch of great content out there. So keep putting these ideas in, because we're going to gather those together and share them with one another. The employee resource groups. See what else comes in. Volunteering.
Volunteering's great.
Hackathons, if you're in tech, if you have any sort of hackathons or challenges, competitions, can be super fun. When I was in management consulting on Fridays, we traveled Monday through Thursday at Oliver Wyman, but on Fridays, we'd be in the office and we'd serve food. Food gets people in the office. If you're struggling to get people there, have food. And we would do a lunch and learn, and you would have rotating teams. Here's what we did for Disney, for Sprint, for United Airlines, and we just talk for Citibank, and we would have people present what they learned, and then people were like, oh, I didn't know we worked for Citibank. I didn't know we did this. Oh, I didn't know we did guest loyalty. American Symphony, we do pro bono, and a lot of it was just that, we're a 3,500 person company. People didn't even know what we did. Bunch of outdoor events, team, skills maps, obstacle courses, education council, trivia. Again, trivia is a great, games or anything like that is a great way to have people have visibility. Things, art, talent shows, people or certain Slack or Teams channels. There was one organization I talked to that had a bacon lovers. And all these people they didn't even know existed in the organization, they're like, they work here? And they're like real bacon passionate. And that was the thing that got them to start to speak up, and it made a huge difference.
We had a prior company of mine, when we were going through kind of a big scale phase where just everything was breaking. And again, startups, you're not documenting stuff, training's hard, you're bringing new people in every day. One of the things we started doing was, having folks in services and product and other teams build the training for new employees. And we, it solved the documentation issue we had, it solved the training issue we had. And we had those people who were the best at it really showcase what they understood, which then gave them opportunity. Like, the thing about mentorship and all these things also is two-way, right? The mentor is getting the benefit of getting to coach somebody going through this. Maybe they're not a manager yet, right? That's a great 0 to 1. So there's all these places where there's usually a company need in there that can be satisfied while the employee is getting something immensely valuable out of it as well.
And I think that's the point about mentoring. It's not just charity. Oftentimes, the best way to retain information is to teach or develop others. It's the highest retention rate, where consuming it, the stat we had earlier, you forget most of it within about 7 days. Reverse mentoring, another great one, office hours, et cetera. Well, we're running up on time. We'll stay on for a couple minutes, but we've got a couple offers for you all. So, Nick, do you want to talk about the ebook resource that Beamery's got for everybody?
Yeah, I mean, this is, for those interested, I think this is right off the back of what we've been talking about. We've been spending a lot of time on how skills are transferable and how to use that to really transform talent practices. Clicking on the QR code there will take you right to the report. Hopefully there's some useful information there for everybody.
Great. And can you tell us just, Nick, a little bit about Beamery? I'll share a little bit about Pilot, but just so everyone has a sense of, who you are and what y'all do.
Yeah, absolutely. At Beamery, I mean, our goal has really been to ensure people, can become, kind of reach their full potential regardless of where they start, where they started, who they are, where they're from. And we really focus on a whole suite of things we call talent lifecycle management. So it's everything from tools to help just that recruitment experience be first class, through tools to engage employees and alumni and really run your entire talent practice from planning to hiring to retaining talent all in one place.
And great brand. I know a lot of people have worked for Beamery. Great reputation in the industry. Pilot, we help employees feel powerful at work. We have a turnkey development program. We put thousands of people through it all over the world. Named #1 HR tech product of the year. And in particular, we help people in learning and development, talent, and DEI deliver on their promises. And it's all about what Nick said, having people be more visible, raise their hand, help managers, etc. We're going to stay on for a couple more questions, and so don't go anywhere. But if you have your LinkedIn, you'd like to network, remember, one of the things where you can be more visible yourself, connect with some people, right? I threw my LinkedIn in there, add us, add other fellow HR, because we share. I put an article yesterday about, the wrong questions to ask, versus the right, et cetera. Put that in there. Again, you want to, identify who those true HiPos are, right? But focus on developing them. And visit our websites, connect with Nick and I, et cetera. We're going to be on for questions. So if anyone's got a great question or a comment, drop it in the chat. We're on for a couple more minutes, and we'll have our contact information here as well. But let's, what vexing, HiPo, development, culture, jungle gym, tree, bacon farm. We had a bunch of bacon lovers, by the way. People were really getting into the bacon. And if you're a veggie bacon person, it can be veggie bacon. We got bacon for everybody. So, and there's a request about maybe someone from the Beamery team can drop in the ebook link as well. The code wasn't working for somebody. So
I can get that shared if we don't get it in time.
Okay, great. I think. And I'll just mention, Nick, as we're waiting, if anyone has, again, questions, drop in your LinkedIn, the bacon Slack. People are going to be I didn't expect that one to be the one that really took off, the shooting star, but rocket ship. But, I think, Nick, what I see is an overcomplication of development and HiPos, that people try to turn it into, a 4-dimensional crazy thing, and we have to have this, and it's got to be AI powered and blah, 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 versus saying, like, what could we use quickly? Because if it takes 2 or 3 years to design, to build, to buy, to roll out, you're going to if you have 20% attrition, you're going to lose most of your workforce by the time you get the program in place to retain them.
Yeah.
What have you seen from kind of the speed perspective and the simplification, so we don't try to boil the ocean?
Yeah. No, it's right. I mean, and I think that just leads to paralysis, right? So, I think for a lot of these things too, it's just, these are personalized, like careers are personalized experiences, and we've not created that experience for people. And the reality is that is bespoke. So I think this is the balance of, like, we need some structure to guide things. We need some guardrails, but we don't need, all the architecture of the house kind of worked out. The rest of this is like, let's get the tools in place and let's enable teams to be the enablers rather than the administrators. And I think that's the question we have to, are we administering process or are we enabling development? And we need to aim for the latter.
Great. And Gina asked a quick question about how do you encourage HiPo introverts to be found? Part of that, Gina's expectation setting that just because they're introverted doesn't mean they should be invisible. Right? Introversion is not an assessment of capability. It is an assessment of preference, right? Extroverts can be quiet. Introverts can be louder. It's possible. And so you have to help them realize that that's what's going to help them get ahead. And it's not to always be extroverted, but it is to give voice to what they want or need. And part of it could be flexibility. So they can be on a nonprofit board, or support from the organization, or anything like that can make a huge difference. So, and Liz got the Beamery resource in there for you all. Make sure you download it, how skills are transforming the future of work. And then I know, Tim, we're going to throw up one last poll. Can we throw that poll up real quick? I almost forgot. So let's throw that poll up real quick. We want to know from folks if you're currently planning a new program, and if you'd like to learn more about either of our other organizations, because, again, we're a way that you can simplify and act quickly. Jess put in the chat, by the way, introversion produces quiet results. And
sometimes it's the loudest person on Slack, right?
Isn't
it's all about, it's just a different, more comfortable format for some people.
And you think about the power dynamics of being in a conference room, highest person paid person's opinion, rent, all those things. Or I always remembered that we'd be at headquarters and we'd have people on the Polycom conference phones, and they'd be in, India and London and Japan and all over. And it just was very hard to be visible because we talk over them, wasn't a very inclusive model. So thinking about, that's a great point, leveraging the digital tools for more visibility, right? Leveraging, all of that is a huge opportunity. It looks like most of you are started planning. Some of you are expecting to start within the next 6 months, and then 30 of you have no plans in the near future. We'd love to help you with those plans. And it looks like Beamery and Pilot both have some folks interested to talk, so we'll definitely be following up. And it looks like there's some more comments coming in, more links. But yeah, using Slack, using LinkedIn. I mean, I find also LinkedIn is an interesting thing. You may not have a good intranet at your company. You may not have Slack. You may not have Teams, Yammer, if Jive is still around. I don't remember, but company employees see each other from the same company. If you're following the same company or you tag, you will meet people. Add your colleagues. Sometimes people don't add their coworkers to LinkedIn for some reason. But no one's at this day and age thinking you're looking for a job just because you're on LinkedIn. That was 5 or 10 years ago. Oh, they're on LinkedIn. They must be searching. Now it's like, no, they're on LinkedIn. They're reading business news and connecting with colleagues. And your department launches a new great initiative, support it. Your CEO puts something up, comment on the internet. Commenting is an unlock in your career, and especially not just like cool, great, congrats, thanks, but something meaningful of like, wow, this is really cool. We did this at my site with the new whatever. They probably don't even know. We've had people that have done that and have gotten calls from executives who the employee doesn't know and they don't know them, but they're like, it's a switchboard thing that happened just using the comments. Well, Nick, last words of wisdom, last piece of advice for folks that are trying to really make an impact in the next calendar year on HiPo's development. What would you leave them with in terms of words of wisdom?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we covered a lot. I would say a lot of this stuff can be overwhelming when you're starting from zero. So this is about starting small and celebrating wins early and often, and then building on that momentum. So again, empower people, but start with something that, like anything you're trying to build a habit with, start small and then kind of scale up from there.
Well, I leave my last bit. I'd love everyone in the chat for Nick and I for feedback. And speaking of asking, what's a word or a phrase you're leaving with? How do you feel right now? What do you take away? It helps Nick and I with feedback and our teams that are in marketing, et cetera. What do you, it sounds like, Nicole liked the format, Gina liked the presentation, et cetera. What are you taking away? What are you leaving with, et cetera? I think the starting small piece, I plus one that. And what I, add is for anything new or different to happen in an organization, you have to disrupt something. You have to cut through something. You have to, reallocate budget. You have to push some other priority down. And we often have a lot of good ideas. Employee development, HiPos, often exist in the realm of that'd be interesting. Oh, nifty, gee whiz, cool, innovative, someday. And I can't tell you the number of sort of tire kicker, window shopper people that would love to maybe someday do something for HiPos. Meanwhile, the odometer on someone's career keeps clicking and they're driving to a dead end, right? And so this is an opportunity to be a change agent, whatever you're doing in your career, because the people that develop these programs, that buy the programs, that leverage the consulting firms, whatever they do, their careers move because they have a story to tell. They've got data to share. They have meaning and purpose about what they're doing versus sort of just enabling a dysfunctional model of work that we all know doesn't work, and that HR is, most people in HR want to make a difference while you get into the field. So this is a really big opportunity for all of us, career-wise, for our own careers to be visible by helping others with their careers. And it looks like budget reflect values, we heard, discussion, empowered, more aware, eye-opening. Secrets of getting ahead is getting started, inspired, validated by finding ways to encourage more movement, disruption in L&D, energy, the panel format. Great. Well, and Nick gets extra props, remember, because he slept on a 777 last night. I slept on a Tempur-Pedic Cloud Supreme Breeze with 400 sheet thread count, sheets like a baby with my Dyson, fan on me. And, Nick was somewhere above Greenland, hopefully, not too sweaty from chicken on the plane. So, but Nick, thanks for joining me today. I had a lot of fun. I would love to do this again, and appreciate HRE for bringing all this together as well.
Thanks, Ben.
All right. Cheers, everyone.